Imagine having access to a tribe of mentors consisting of some of the best tech leaders in the world, people you may have never heard of, but who in just an hour, you'll know their unfiltered career story, the bets they took, the decisions they made, where they failed, and the lessons that they learned along the way. Welcome to the What Makes You Tick podcast. Grant, welcome back to the show.
Hey, Tulu, how are you?
Very well, thanks. And you?
I'm good, thank you. Good to see you again.
Likewise. So we recorded not too long ago, and then we felt like there was probably a little bit more that we could talk about. So we've got this bonus episode, and the topic for this is a little bit about sales leadership strategy. So I'm really looking forward to hearing from your experience some of the things that you found really, really impactful and effective.
Cool. Thanks for having me back.
Oh, absolute pleasure. Absolute pleasure. So my first question is around, how do you align a team around a plan?
I think there's probably various ways to do it, but the way I've seen it most effectively, companies I've worked in and with tend to focus on aligning their senior team around a strategy, and that totally makes sense. And it's not rocket science. You get very clear objectives. You get the right team on the bus, the right individuals. You make sure they know what their part in it is. They're properly incentivized, and then you kind of leave them to it. That's my experience of being in the team and leading senior leadership teams. But when I see that in sales teams, quite often I see incentives not aligned with the objectives of the plan. So I've seen, for example, new start businesses in a market where the sales cycle might be 3 to 6 months, and they're trying to recruit good sales talent based on what they learn from the revenue they bring in. Now, in a challenging recruitment market as we've got right now, people need to see a direct line of sight between the actions they're going to carry out today and what they're going to earn. So from a sales perspective, making sure that you're pulling the right levers or pushing the right buttons, be very, very clear. Is it a lead gen and opportunity creation challenge that you have, or is it actually closing out deals around getting the right conversion ratios, for example? So I think from a sales perspective, making sure the incentives are really, really clearly tied to the actions and the behaviors that you want to see in the team. And when you say it, or certainly it sounds to me when I say it, it sounds quite obvious, but very often there's a disconnect between the behaviors people want to see in their sales team and what they're actually giving them as an incentive to create the behaviors. And for me, particularly sales teams and sales organizations, they're incentivized by what are they going to earn, what's the OT and all of that good stuff. So you need to make sure they're very, very clearly aligned.
And I think it comes with understanding the market, understanding your industry, understanding your current strategy and your current goals. And I feel like sometimes those things change, but the incentivization hasn't necessarily caught up with that. So I think you're right. It does sound super simple, but actually doing it in practice and keeping on top of it is what makes it a little bit harder.
Yeah, and I think for understandable reasons, a lot of businesses don't like to mess with the incentive scheme too much. And you shouldn't. If you change it too often, then, the sales team really don't know where they stand. But you're 100% right. If the strategy changes, the objectives change, the direction changes, then you need to be really, really, really clear and be absolutely sure the incentives are driving the right behaviors towards that, or the sales team won't get their OTE, you'll start to bleed people, and it just all gets more difficult.
Have you had to change the incentivization structure kind of midway before?
Yeah, I've had to do it. I've had to do it a number of times, and I think it depends. I've done it for clients. I've done it, clients that have an incentive scheme that's not aligned with the behaviours that I won't drive the behaviours that they need in the sales team. So yeah, it's difficult. The biggest challenge is making sure that the sales team understand where you're going with it and what they're going to get from it. And you need to be really clear on the communications around that. I think the real basic fundamental is, I think sales teams need to have a direct line of sight between what they're doing and what they'll earn. If you don't have that clear line of sight, it's very, very difficult to drive the right behaviours and have a motivated sales team, in my experience.
So what were some of the things that you found in terms of that change process that have made it smoother or made it work better when you've had to do that?
I think, to your point, sharing the market information. So having a very sort of clear view of what the market drivers are and what the objectives of the business are, and making sure that you're sharing that information with the sales team. And a lot of the time, the senior leadership team will have clear sight of what the strategy is and how it's developing, but that often doesn't make it to the sales team. So I think being very clear on the reasons for the changes, what the market drivers are, and essentially to show that it's being changed to help the business, but also to help the sales team, because they're going to start to earn more if the incentives are right, based on the market knowledge and market drivers. So that'd be one. And I think, again, it's a basic fundamental, but often doesn't happen. Some very clear worked examples. If I achieve this in terms of conversion ratio or deal numbers or revenue, then I will earn this as a result of that. So I think that's really important to make sure it's just really crystal clear in terms of what those calculations look like. Because often it's disappears into a sort of mysterious formula and calculation that nobody sees until the number pops out at the end, and the sales leaders are generally left trying to explain it after the fact. So try and keep the sales team aligned and keep them informed, and so they know exactly what's going on through the process. That it causes more questions and a little bit of unrest, I guess. But my experience is you're much better to be upfront and open that you're changing the scheme and why you're doing it. That's my experience.
I really liked what you said about, making it clear that actually this benefits them. And I think it's important that that's a key part that does actually benefit the sales team, because otherwise it is going to just be demotivating.
Yeah, and it creates suspicion. If the numbers are changed or the calculations are changed and there's no clarity around what that is or why, then it naturally creates suspicion in the team. And just need to be really, really open about it, as open as you possibly can be.
So my next question for you is about which members of the sales team are the engine for your growth?
I think that generally the assumption is that it's the high performers. So, when I'm looking at a sales team, I would generally split them into three broad categories. And, this is nothing I'm sure that you haven't heard or your listeners haven't heard, but you've got your top performers, your mid performers, and your underperformers or low performers. What I find, and my experience has been in corporate and also working with clients, that the top performers tend to get all of the attention. And I understand why that is. But a lot of the time they're already performing at the top of their game. So in terms of the increase in their performance that you can create through, improved leadership or improved processes or information or, technology, whatever, then can be relatively limited for that top performing group. When you go to the lower performers, probably at some point the business needs to make a decision that they need to go and be successful elsewhere. That's just, that happens. That's just part of the natural dynamics of a team. But what I find is that mid-range, and it's normally about 60% of the sales team, if you can incrementally improve the effectiveness of that mid-range part of your team, they, by definition, have got the majority of your customer base generally. So if you, and they might not be the highest performing, they might not be the most talented or most experienced, but if you can give them better structure, better process, better incentive, and better clarity around planning, better technology, then you can actually drive an improvement in that mid-range part of your team. And from my experience, that's where the growth comes from. And that top performing element, you need to be really, really, on it in terms of looking after them. Absolutely, you do. And you need to squeeze as much as you can for them out of the incentive scheme or whatever it is that motivates them and keep them happy, good leadership and all of that stuff. But that mid-range, those mid-performers, for me, That's where the sales leaders can really drive growth, and that'd be the engine of the growth engine of growth for the team. Because the performance gap between what they could do and what they're actually doing, that's generally much bigger than the performance gap between what a top performer is doing and what they could do if they were 100% effective. So that middle part of the team, and often it gets overlooked, but they're the ones that benefit the most from more process, more training, more technology, or whatever it is that you give to them to drive that incremental performance improvement.
So it sounds like, if I understand right, what you're saying is it's not about ignoring the top and the bottom, but it's about giving the right attention and focusing on the right thing. So with the top people, it's about really making sure that they're happy, making sure that they're comfortable, making sure that the direction of travel is correct. But with the mid people, that's where we're focusing more of the developmental attention. So that's where we're really working on getting them better, right? Is that what you're saying?
100%, because that's the part. Well, it's the majority of the team. I mean, most will be in that mid range, and again, it's just the rough rule of thumb I would use, and what I've experienced is it's normally about 60% of the team. So therefore, they hold the majority of the customer base. They're having the majority of the customer interactions, and if you focus, they're the ones that will benefit the most from any training and development, any learning and development, any technology improvements that you bring to them. That absolutely, that's the group that will benefit the most from it. And as the biggest part of the team, that'll have the biggest impact on your growth numbers.
Do you ever get the top performers involved in the development of the mid guys, or is that a bit of a distraction?
It depends. I mean, I think it's great for motivation and for personal development for the top performers, for them to mentor and coach, start to become part of that group. So yeah, absolutely. But you do need to be, to your point, very conscious that can distract them from their day job, which is making sure they're closing the deals and doing what they're great at. But I think if you have top performers, then absolutely get them involved in the development of the mid-range, so middle performers. But one thing that you do need to be also cognizant of is a lot of top performing salespeople that I've met can be naturally good at what they do. They're not necessarily the best at process, keeping CRM up to date, all the stuff that are the hygiene factors to make sure the team is running well. So not everybody will be able to emulate what the top performers do. So I think you need to be quite selective in terms of who you ask from that top performing group to help with the middle range guys, and also what it is you ask them to be involved in. From motivational point of view, great, but sometimes the top performers are not necessarily the best at those structure and process type activities that you really want to focus on with those mid-range to drive up the effectiveness.
That makes sense. And from your experience with working with different companies, what have been some of the blockers that you've seen to sales transformation or sales and marketing transformation?
I mean, I think it's easy for organizations to assume that investment in technology is going to is going to improve effectiveness, and it can. But the biggest challenges that I've seen businesses have to overcome are behavioral and cultural challenges. And regardless of what the technology is that you implement or what the strategy is that you implement, the thing that really makes the difference are those behavioral challenges and those cultural challenges. I think I heard a saying quite a long time ago, and I loved it at the time. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. So regardless of what strategy you want to implement, and we talked earlier about changing incentives and changing how the team is structured based on market dynamics or whatever is changing around the organization. But once a business culture is established, it's very, very difficult to change that. So the biggest successes that I've had and I've seen are where the strategy is implemented, but the culture and behavior of the team or the business and the organization that's been established is recognized as part of that strategy. Because if the two are diametrically opposed, then people will just not buy
It's
into
not
it,
going
and
to
the
work.
culture will destroy the strategy. It's just and I've seen it happen. Culture and behavior is very, very difficult to overcome just through technology or strategy implementation. Behavioral challenges, cultural challenges, ignore those at your peril for any kind of transformation project is my experience.
How do you go about changing a culture?
So I think leadership is one. I think, and it's not, you can listen to or watch any number of leadership gurus, and they'll talk about the fact that the leadership sets the tone, and that's absolutely true. And I've been in organisations where a culture change was needed, and when a new leader started, or when I started in leadership of a team, then some very, very clear visual things need to happen to show people that things are changing. So whether that be, if a culture is not great at meeting deadlines and really quite, flexible around discipline, then the leader has to really, really step up and be absolutely structured, be very, very black and white about timekeeping, about meetings running on time. There are just some very, very obvious visual cues, I think, that you have to be very clear about when you're trying to change a culture in it, not just in an organization, but even at a more micro level within a specific team, sales team or otherwise. Because people react to how the leader behaves, people react to the tone that they set, and people react to the way that they behave. So I think leadership is just, that's absolutely critical to behavioral change and cultural change.
How do you deal with it when the leader themselves is the problem?
I think it depends. Do you mean as a team, or do you mean the business?
So probably a bit of both, actually. So have you ever been in a team where the leader is the problem, and how have you overcome that? And then as the business, so when you've gone in and you see actually one of the leaders is the problem.
So yeah, absolutely. Been in both circumstances. I think in the former, I focused very, very clearly on what I thought my objectives were, and tried to set my own standards for my own team. Almost regardless of what the wider culture and the cues and were around the wider culture. Going into a business where the leader's the problem, it depends what level of leader you're talking about. I've been in businesses where you've had to switch out sort of team leadership, move them into different roles, or give them a different set of objectives that play to their strengths. And ultimately, some people don't fit culture, and some cultures don't fit people. So ultimately, sometimes people have to move on. That's just part and parcel of it. But obviously, the larger the organisation and the more ingrained the culture is, the more challenging it is to change. But it only comes about through strong leadership. And there's just no question. That's the absolute key.
That makes sense. And where do you learn about some of these strategies and some of these things? Is it just from experience, or have you done some kind of learning? Are there resources that you normally look at to keep up to date?
Yeah, I've done a number of leadership. I was fortunate enough to do leadership training or strategy at IMD in Lausanne Business School, which was an incredible opportunity, and it was a fantastic experience. And I think, it really comes with experience. I think there are so many resources around now that you can tap into, whether it be on LinkedIn or LinkedIn Learning, or the various people that you can follow now that understand business culture and cultural change and transition. So you just need to go looking for the ones that I think resonate with you, and they're not that difficult to find these days. But personally, I was fortunate enough to have had leadership and strategy and transformation training or coaching or mentoring in a very structured way as part of my professional development. So that's one of the things I'm very grateful for in my career.
Awesome. So Grant, just as we close, what was the toughest lesson that you've had to learn as a sales leader?
The toughest lesson. I think the toughest lesson, there are a number of them, but I'll give you one.
You can give me
I've
three.
been lucky
You can give me
enough.
three if you want to.
Yeah, pushing me now. So the first one that springs to mind, I've been lucky enough to work with a number of very, very talented sales people, very successful, great at driving revenue, tremendous at creating relationships. But in certain businesses and in certain territories, it's difficult for great salespeople, once they get to a certain level, to progress. I mean, the best salesperson in the world might not be the best sales leader in the world. But I've been in some environments where the only option for that person to progress is to become a sales leader. And they might not necessarily want to do it, but they've been successful in their career to date, and that's the obvious step for them. I think I have found it tough to manage really good people in those situations, knowing that they're not cut out for, ready for, or the right fit for leadership positions when they come up. I think in North America, that's less of a challenge because, I mean, my experience is that sales is very much a career in North America. And if you want to stay from the age of 17 to the age of 67 in sales, then you'll do really well. You'll earn, your earning potential is huge. But in certain other parts of the world, then that's not so much the case. And I've found it difficult working with great people who have kind of hit a bit of a ceiling with their sales career. That's been a challenge that's been difficult at various points in my career. Glad to say that in each case the person's gone on to continue to be successful. But that's something that I reflect on quite regularly. Is when people go down the sales career, the sales route, as a career, that can be a challenge, and they can hit a point in the career where they're not sure what to do, and sometimes the business isn't sure what to do with them. That's a difficult point to get to.
And what are some of the things that you've been able to do to overcome that? Because I think it's that thing of, can I continue being an individual contributor, or do I have to transition into leadership? And I think those two kind of split paths are quite new in terms of realizing that actually you just need to create more paths for ICs as well, so that they can still grow, because then you're not forcing them into something they're not good at. So what were some of the things that you were able to do to help those situations?
Well, kind of related to what we talked about previously, when strategy changes, for example, if you're in an organization that's been territory-based as a sales team, and then they want, as most businesses have done and should do, become sector-focused, then you can start to create more career path around that sector specialism. And whether that's moving from as an individual contributor, from being an account manager to a strategic account manager, or whatever the change might be, but you can start to create additional fulfillment in different career paths that don't involve you having to become a leader. And so, you're absolutely spot on. And that's what I've tried to do. I've tried to create opportunity, whether it be, if appropriate, giving them some level of coaching and mentoring, experience and responsibility around less experienced, less successful members of the team, or whether it be investing in them to make them a sector expert, not just by giving them a title, but get them to the right training, get them involved in the right industry bodies, get them to the right events and exhibitions, whether it's oil and gas or construction or manufacturing or whatever it might be, give them exposure to that development. Because at the end of the day, I mean, everybody likes a fancier title than they've got at the moment. That's just human nature. But I think what people really want is personal development and challenge. And, for sales teams, if there's some additional pound notes or dollar notes that go along with that, then that's all good. But people want to be challenged. They want personal development. They want to learn, and they want to grow. That's my experience. So, long answer to a short question. I mean, the short answer would be, look for ways to give them additional fulfillment that doesn't mean they have to start managing 5 or 6 people that they just really don't want to do.
Something that you mentioned was that sectors are the way forward over territories. Why do you think that is?
It's not in every business, but I think so. If you look at the move of there are a number of industrial businesses. I'll use industrial businesses as an example. So that there are still a number of very large industrial businesses who have essentially one sales channel. So you've essentially got your field sales channel, and that's fine. It's been effective for them. But as you move towards omni-channel or even multi-channel, so e-commerce, inside sales, as you start to develop a proper multi-channel sales approach, then customers become less inclined to want to talk to generalists, because the generalist stuff, the more commoditized purchases, they can buy easily online or via a phone call from inside sales or whatever it might be. But when they do want to see spend the time and invest the time in a conversation one-to-one with a sales rep or an account manager, that person has to bring more than just a product or service. They have to have industry knowledge, sector knowledge. They need to understand the drivers of the market that their customers operate within, all of that. And really the only way that you can develop your sales teams around that is sector specialism, because they can't have that depth of knowledge across all the sectors if they're generalists. So if you're going to move your actual human interactions, if you like, with field sales and account managers and strategic account managers up the value chain with customers, then they have to offer a lot more, and they have to be immersed in the sector that they're talking to their customers within. Otherwise, the customer they can do a lot of their own research themselves. They need to bring more of that. And in my experience, the way to do that is to develop sector specialists.
Got it. That makes sense. Just before we close, were there any other tough lessons that you've learned that you wanted to share?
I've learned lots of tough lessons. I think the cultural managing out with your own country is a challenge the first time you do it. I relatively early in my career had my first international assignment, if you like, and I started managing different cultures when I was had a GM role, P&L role, and being cognizant of the differences in culture between your country and the other countries you're operating within that was a tough lesson. And the first time I did it, I saw all of the similarities with the new country that I'd become responsible for culturally. And then the first labour dispute that I had to deal with, all of the differences culturally came out and absolutely blindsided me. And it taught me that, you can proactively learn about the culture that you're working within. You can. I mean, you can. There are organisations out there that can help you to culturally acclimatise and to understand what the differences between your own culture are and those cultures of the country or countries that you're then starting to work with. And I mean, part of it you can only learn by experience, but some of it you can actually learn through, as I say, there are various organisations out there that can help you with it. But I was not cognizant of that the first time I managed out with my own country, and it bit me really badly, really badly.
Those labour disputes are very different in different countries, so I can understand that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I wouldn't mention the cultures involved, but when I had the discussion with a team leader about the salary of one of their team, and we agreed that that we would do something about that salary. So we did it, and then 2 weeks after the salary had been amended, the whole team was in my office asking why they weren't getting the same. And I was like, well, hold on, where did this come from? It was just very, very challenging. Yeah, I mean, I thought I was having a very private conversation that wouldn't go any further. Just naivety at the end of the day really came and bit me. But that was a big cultural lesson. It was very different from how it would have worked in the UK.
Mm. 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 Thank you so much for sharing, and thank you for coming back for a bonus episode. I've really enjoyed talking to you again. So thanks a lot, Grant.
Many thanks, Tolu.
And thank you guys for listening, and see you on the next episode. Thanks for listening to What Makes You Tick, and I hope you've enjoyed listening as much as I've enjoyed having the conversation.
Absolutely. You don't have to have met someone in real life to be mentored by them, right? We've all got favourite sales books, and hopefully this podcast is giving you access to a whole new tribe of mentors who, through their stories and best advice, will help you to achieve a bigger and better career in tech. So if you want to never miss a beat, subscribe now, and then you'll get notified as soon as next week's mentor releases their story. Thank you so much, and we'll see you on the next episode.